call this meeting to order, and we'll start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Welcome to meeting 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, and I'd like to remind everyone of the following points. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those who are on Zoom and our witnesses in the first panel are all on Zoom today. At the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person or via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The committee clerks and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated speaking order. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Thursday, September 18th, 2025, the committee shall resume its study of the management of Canadian energy exports. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Professor David Novog, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a director at McMaster Institute for Energy Studies, McMaster University, and for Energy Storage Canada, Andrew Teal, Vice President, Policy and Government Relations, and Robert Tremblay, Policy Manager. All witnesses have conducted a mandatory witness onboarding test. I think they all passed, Mr. Clerk. One just barely, but we got you through. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. Professor Novog, we're going to begin with you. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for the invitation to speak here today. As an expert in nuclear energy, I've been involved in various aspects of the technology for 30 years. This includes experiences in the Japan and France nuclear fleets, as well as with Ontario Hydro and its successor companies, and now in academia. I had roles advising the Ontario government on nuclear emergency planning, as well as performing R&D for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And I'm currently a professor in the Faculty of Engineering at McMaster, and I work at the McMaster Nuclear Reactor, the MNR. The MNR is Canada's largest research reactor. It produces many critical nuclear isotopes, some used domestically and some exported, and it is a singular, unique infrastructure supporting Canada's nuclear sector. In the nuclear field, there are immense export possibilities in terms of direct sales and technical services, some of which are already underway today. Our recent successes in refurbishment in Ontario and new builds at Darlington have put Canada center stage on the global nuclear discussions. While our exports of Canadian CANDU technology were decades ago, Canada continues to see return on those investments. Of particular note are the international refurbishment projects being led by Canadian companies like CANDU Energy, where the entire Canadian-centered supply chain is performing critical work for these overseas markets. The net services and component contracts to support those CANDU exports over the years have been a huge success story that few people have recognized. The new SMR project at Darlington will be another defining moment for the Canadian nuclear story, as globally many countries are considering that design. A key element of our success, not often recognized, has been the top-tier talent trained through Canada's colleges and universities. While I've spent my career looking at things of deep complexity, from the innermost parts of the reactor to large-scale accidents like at Fukushima, it has become clear to me that workforce availability, knowledge, and expertise are the foundation of success. So I'd like to start with the question of what is the issue. In a recent workforce planning study performed at McMaster, we predict significant workforce stresses in the coming decade for the nuclear energy and isotope sectors. The predictions show that the direct and supply chain employment demands may triple over the coming decade. This is founded on 4 key points. First, the independent electric system operator in Ontario calls for 17 new gigawatts of capacity domestically in Ontario alone. Given the capacity factor of renewables and difficulties with seasonal storage, it is likely that a bulk of this baseload supply will be met by nuclear. 17 gigawatts would be approximately 60 BWRX units, so 60 reactors like are currently under construction in Darlington. So it's likely that some of these reactors will be of the large variety. In any event, Canada may have multiple nuclear units under construction simultaneously, also while looking at supporting the export market, putting significant strains on the labor market. The second point is that sector-to-sector worker transitions and immigration will be critical to meeting these workforce requirements, and the provincial and federal government cooperation on skills development and retraining will be needed. And thirdly, as successful companies throughout the nuclear landscape, from Cameco and mining and all the way to used nuclear fuel by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, as they capitalize on global growth as well as domestic expansion, recruitment will need to ramp up significantly. And lastly, and not often recognized, observing large-scale infrastructure projects like those in the UK show that attrition rates can reach 20% in these large mega projects. To counter this, there have been excellent programs from Tri-Council research funding to support faculty, to support universities, including over 100 highly qualified personnel passing through my lab alone. In addition, Natural Resources Canada, through initiatives like its Enabling SMR program, have increased the number of companies active in Canada and also supported R&D at universities. But as Canada embarks in its simultaneous mega projects in the defense sector, oil and gas, energy, AI, and minerals, a national workforce issue is emerging where sectors will compete over a limited talent pool. So lastly, how can we do more? Recent announcements by the federal government on the Canada Impact Plus chair is a promising start. This will bring hundreds of world-leading talent to universities and will also fund a large number of new students in these areas. Additional short-term actions, for example, enhancing support programs like the Canada Research Chair Program or transitioning the enabling NRCan programs to large reactor builds would certainly help. Finally, working with provincial leaders to establish sustained, targeted, and direct funding to grow training programs and facilities like McMaster's reactor is desperately needed. Urgent response now is needed to meet the future demand. I'm happy to take questions related to the workforce study, nuclear expansion, or nuclear sector in general. Thank you to the member committee for their time.
Thank you, Professor Novak. And we're now going to go on to Mr. Teal. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Andrew Teal, Vice President of Policy and GR at Energy Storage Canada. I'm also joined by my colleague, Robert Tremblay, ESC Policy Manager. Energy Storage Canada is the national association representing companies involved in the development, manufacturing, integration, and operation of energy storage technologies across the country. Today, I want to focus on 3 core messages for you. Energy storage is now essential infrastructure for Canada's electricity future. Storage is also an industrial and supply chain opportunity, not just a grid solution. Canada can lead globally, but doing so requires pragmatic federal policy coupled with smart provincial planning. Canada's electricity system is undergoing rapid transformation. With rising demand, increasing reliability pressures, energy storage provides firm capacity, flexible dispatchability, and critical reliability services. Canada's storage market is also accelerating quickly. Ontario has more than 2,800 megawatts of storage under contract or construction, one of the largest procurement pipelines in North America, and other provinces are also moving forward. Quebec has identified over 1,200 megawatts of opportunity. Alberta has currently deployed over 200 megawatts of storage and is looking to procure up to 750 megawatts of new storage in the next 2 years. Storage is also becoming one of the most important clean industrial opportunities of this decade. Canada is increasingly shifting beyond vehicle assembly toward the core battery supply chain, including battery cells and modules, grid-scale storage systems, long-duration storage technologies, and recycling and critical mineral recovery. The initial EV investment established in Ontario as an auto transition hub. The next phase is a deeper dive into the battery value supply chain where economic value, security relevance, and export potential are much higher. Grid-scale storage demand can become a stable domestic anchor for manufacturing capacity, even as EV markets face cyclical uncertainty. As we look ahead, one of the fastest growing demand drivers for storage is AI and advanced computing. These step load increases can take tens or even hundreds of megawatts at single sites. Transmission expansion can take up to 10 years, while storage systems can be deployed and permitted within 2 to 4. Storage creates room for economic opportunity while deferring costly upgrades and supporting industrial and compute investment. Storage also strengthens Canada's electricity trade potential. Interties are essential infrastructure, but they are only as valuable as the flexibility behind them. Storage allows provinces to absorb energy during low demand periods and discharge during peaks, making interties more firm, controllable, and economically valuable. This supports Canada's ability to export clean electricity at the right time. Canada already has a diverse group of storage technology leaders and OEMs, including Invinity in British Columbia, manufacturing vanadium flow batteries, Hydrostore in Ontario, leading globally in compressed air storage, eZinc, developing zinc-based long-duration storage solutions, and Evlo, a company backed by Hydro-Quebec, strengthening domestic battery systems integration. This diversity matters. Canada is not just importing storage, we are building expertise. At the same time, it is critical to acknowledge near-term supply chain realities. Battery supply chains remain globally concentrated, particularly for cells, subcomponents, and processed critical minerals. Even leading North American OEMs still rely on international inputs in the near term. Canada cannot flip a switch overnight to full domestic sourcing without risking delays, cost increases, and potential reliability impacts. This brings us to energy security. ESC supports the principle of excluding high-risk foreign enterprises from participation in Canadian energy procurements consistent with global best practices. However, these restrictions must be designed carefully, and abrupt or poorly designed measures could delay projects, raise costs, or undermine local and Indigenous participation. ESC recommends a risk-based, non-retroactive transition framework, a clear, targeted, state-owned enterprise definition based on ownership and control thresholds, no retroactive application to existing contract projects, and a phased implementation plan starting with cyber-sensitive components. Cybersecurity risk management is not starting from scratch. Utilities and regulators already impose standards through interconnection requirements, procurement controls, remote access restrictions, firmware management, and testing and certification. The question is how to build on this foundation in a smart and targeted way. The federal government has a central role to ensuring Canada captures the full economic value of storage while protecting its energy security. ESC's recommendations are therefore the following. First, optimize investment tax credits. Second, expand deployment programs. Third, pair restrictions with industrial policy. Restrictions alone do not build supply chains, industrial policy does. ESC recommends a targeted federal storage supply chain fund, incentives, and focused on domestic content bonuses, not restrictions. In closing, energy storage is essential to Canada's electricity future and a major industrial opportunity if done correctly. With clear investment signals, smart supply chain security measures, and coordinated federal incentives, storage can strengthen reliability, lower costs, support reconciliation outcomes with Indigenous populations, and position Canada as a global leader and energy superpower. Thank you, Chair. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you to our presenters this morning. Very clear, very concise, which we appreciate. And we will now go to questions. And we are going to start, as we usually do, with Mr. Tucker. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. We hear a lot about Mark Carney claiming that we're becoming this energy superpower as a nation. Can we become an energy superpower without energy storage, Mr. Teal?
Can we become an energy superpower without energy storage? Just want to make sure I heard the question correctly.
Yes. I know it answers itself, but I'd like to hear from you.
No, absolutely. Yes. Fundamentally, storage is a critical grid enabler. You know, the practices that we're seeing across the country, the different applications of storage based on, pre-existing supply mixes within provinces. Here in Ontario, where I'm located, very strong on nuclear, a lot of base load that, tends to not be as practical of use overnight. Storage plays a role in moving that around. When you have heavy renewable integration, as we see in the Atlantic provinces and even in BC, storage plays a role in that. My colleague Robert, who's actually in Alberta, he can speak to the many uses of storage from creating opportunities for fast frequency response, and fundamentally helping to serve that grid, which is a different market than the rest of Canada in terms of how its energy system is designed, playing a role. So the simple answer is No, fundamentally, we cannot. It is part of Canada's energy superpower agenda.
That is what
as we
is the
all
most frustrating thing, because we have Mark Carney claiming that we're going to be this energy superpower, talking about all the different energy sources, and we're very pro renewables, but without effective storage, these words are hollow. And that's what I heard around 12 months ago when I met with Energy Storage Canada, and I was very encouraged with some of the developments and things that are taking place from coast to coast. But even back then, you were concerned about the Liberals' words not meeting actions, as much so that I understand there was the Energy Storage Conference back in September. Was there any federal Liberals that had attended, and how did that conference go, by the way?
It was a great conference. It was our biggest yet, which is great. I mean, I think that speaks to the growing interest in storage across the country as well as international partners. I don't have a itemized attendee list. I'd have to defer that question to Leon, my VP of Corporate Services. But there was participation from multiple
Liberals that
levels
attended.
in government.
And it was a little bit of words not meeting actions, and the importance of becoming a energy superpower without storage is a little bit ridiculous. But going on to the projects that have failed to get approval across Canada, do you know? Can you highlight a project that maybe failed to receive approval?
I may defer to my colleague Robert to see if he has additional information on that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the question. Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of many projects in Alberta that have failed to get approval. I do know in Ontario there's a dynamic where projects must seek municipal resolutions of support, which can be tricky, but given the timelines and pressure to develop these projects quickly. But of course, it's always incumbent on developers to work with their communities for acceptance as well.
It's a layering on in the regulations that has stopped some of these important energy storage projects. Another area that we're lacking as an energy superpower is the production. One of the main energy sources, the lithium batteries. How much lithium in batteries in Canada is sourced domestically? What is our production and supply chain for the domestically produced stuff?
Yeah, I can jump right in there. It's a tricky question to answer. The supply chain for batteries is quite global. So major producers of lithium are Australia or various countries in South America, as well as some from the United States. But the processing for most of the lithium
in that list
does happen.
China's
apologies.
And China is a larger player in that as well.
Yeah, so China's not a very large producer of lithium itself, but they are a large reformer of lithium, and then it can get integrated into cells either domestically in China or around the world. So a lot of the gap is not necessarily in the extraction of lithium, but in the actual refining of it.
So we mine it out of the ground and we send it to China to be processed, and then we buy back. Is that somewhat the supply chain for those batteries coming from China?
That can be a dynamic. I'd say it's not unique to batteries either. I know, say for rare earth magnets, there's a lot of examples in critical minerals where the refinement is concentration. Yes.
Do you think it would be important for a country like Canada, with the challenges that we face internationally, is to have that production in Canada? And if so, how do we encourage that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for Canada to think about is where it wants to fit into a global supply chain. So we do have a lot of critical minerals, and I think that's an area that we can lean into, including refinement. I think if it's the will of corporations here or the will of the government to support that development.
Just switching gears to Mr. Novo.
20
how much
seconds.
of the research reactor in McMaster, how much funding do you get from the federal government? For the
Going back, thanks for the question. Going back the last 25 years, historically, McMaster's reactor has been self-supporting. So we manufacture medical isotopes, we do irradiation services, and so the reactor itself has been largely self-sustaining. There have been recent investments for us to, sort of one-time increase our radioisotope production, increase hours of operation. But in terms of sustained funding, it is a struggle for the reactor on a yearly basis to make sure that we're at least a cost neutral revenue center within the university.
Thank you. Thank you both. Mr. Gay, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for being with us. Mr. Novak, I'm going to start with you. In a 2023 poll by Ipsos, it found that 62% of Canadians agreed nuclear energy can help Canada meet its climate change goals. So how can we, and you talked about the labor shortage going on right now, but more broadly, how can we take advantage of that and Canadians' willingness to give nuclear energy a fair shot again?
I think thank you for the question. I think the number, in the nuclear industry, we always use the term that success breeds success. So I think part of the reason for the public sentiment, realigning with a, nuclear base load energy generation is the successes we've seen at Bruce and Darlington over the last decade in terms of major, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects. I think it's clear that the climate benefits are there, the reliability of the energy system is there, but I think where the public lacked confidence was in our ability to execute these kind of large multi-scale projects. And I think continuing to do that. Last week, I don't know if people saw the announcement, the last unit at Darlington was brought onto out of refurbishment on time and on schedule, and the project as a whole was months ahead of schedule and $150 million below target. So those kinds of successes, I think, make people believe that the promises made by the nuclear energy sector are achievable.
Thank you. Mr. Teal, this one's for you. We kind of live in an interesting geopolitical situation with our friends down south. We've been orienting our export of electricity north-south, and it made a lot of sense because we're sending a lot of decarbonized electricity down south, but we also have our own need, the interties. The dynamic in the U.S. may or may not apply federal versus states. How do you see this geopolitical environment impacting, and how can storage play a role so that we can export the right electricity to our friends down south?
Yeah, I think maybe what I'll start by touching on is the support of storage for interties. You correctly mentioned, we previously traded a lot of energy north and south, and fundamentally moving forward, that will probably still be the case. But what has become, in clearer focus is the opportunities to trade energy east and west. And storage supports interties by making trade more reliable and more valuable. Interties are strongest when you can move power at the right time, not just when it is available. And that is fundamentally one of the key principles of storage. And the fact that it can be deployed in such a short and timely construction timeline allows you to deploy it where it is most beneficial to the system. Think about, interconnection points that oftentimes have a lot of energy congestion, too many electrons going on the node. So deploying storage strategically allows you to make better use of the existing infrastructure from an interties perspective, but also leverage it, as new transmission comes on board. I think, just to maybe comment quickly on the international uncertainty that we face when it comes to trade and tariffs is that fundamentally, the energy question that we have to have energy security here in Ontario, or in Canada, is of critical importance to us at Energy Storage Canada. And how we see organizations and in my home province of Ontario moving from EV manufacturing to grid battery cell manufacturing is an example of developing that robust domestic supply chain to ensure that we have the opportunity for energy security in the future.
I was also interested, Mr. Teal, by your recommendation at the end, and I'm going to ask to elaborate a little more, but if we run out of time, I invite you to submit to the committee so that we can actually include it. But talk to me a little bit about when you suggested to optimize tax credit, if you want to elaborate, and also I got the sense that you were encouraging carrots instead of sticks on the restriction versus encouraging with measure for the Canadian content of the supply chain.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up on both of those comments and expand a little more. And it's certainly something that ESC, continues to feed into multiple federal processes as well as through our own engagement, the pre-budget submission and others. So just to quickly touch on the investment tax credit side, specifically right now as they stand, some storage technologies, specifically thermal energy storage, which has a considerable role in terms of heat to power, is excluded from these tax credits. And what that means is that, storage in and of itself and the many opportunities presented by the various types of storage technology beyond just grid scale benefits are not eligible for the suite of tax credits that, could fundamentally reshape how we make some of our energy decisions. On the restrictions piece, in the federal budget in November, we saw a nod towards the opportunities for domestic content provisions in projects. ESC, obviously, as I stated in my remarks, is very supportive of, pursuing a domestic supply chain, but we cannot risk current projects that are, underway, securing resources for their projects and have implementation timelines that, could be impacted by decisions that change the project dynamics over a short period of time. So the way that ESC has often approached this challenge, and, it's certainly something that has come up across multiple provinces, is how do we do this in a phased way that allows for projects to continue while fundamentally supporting a future growth scenario for the resources. So, there are certain components that, could be secured domestically at a much easier or in a much shorter timeline. Those are the ones that we would encourage the government to focus on first, and then we, kind of phase in further domestic content adoption over a longer period of time.
Thank you. Thank you both. That's your time, Mr. Gay, and we're now going to move on to Monsieur Sima. 6 minutes.
Merci, messieurs. Je veux juste m'assurer.
6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make sure you can hear the interpretation properly. And then my time will start after that. Just making sure. All right. Excellent. Mr. Teal, a quick question for you. You talked during your opening remarks about the short-term reality, and you mentioned the prime materials that are required for battery storage. And I, of course, see a link between that and critical minerals. During a study of this committee, we heard about a project from rare earths, and we heard about how difficult it is to be able to mine them. And there are many points that are required for that to be able to happen. So I'd like to hear more about those base commodities so that we can try to improve the procurement chain here in Canada. Of course, there are rare earths and others, but how can we improve our value chain in terms of storage? Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I may direct this question to my colleague Robert, who's a little bit more familiar with that specific subject matter than I am.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, when we're thinking about lithium batteries, there's, various minerals that can be in them. So lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, iron, and I think Canada has a large landmass with lots of minerals, and we already do an input into battery supply chains, especially when considering nickel and iron. I think you're correct that I think rare earths can be tricky to extract and tricky to process, as I'd mentioned to a previous questioner, a previous member of the committee, I should say. A lot of the processing and refinement for the minerals is concentrated. So I think that is an aspect where if the supply chain, more of the value chain can be domesticated, that's an area where I think we already are seeing a lot of domestication, both in Canada and globally, is also in the assembly of battery energy storage systems. So Andrew mentioned Evlo, which is a company that does assembly in Quebec, and there are numerous in the United States and Europe that also are doing assembly of cells. So we can think of that as very analogous to auto assembly and auto manufacturing.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tremblay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tremblay. Sorry, I'm going to have to speak quickly to a motion. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but if you could send us some information, additional information in writing on that issue of the supply chain, that would be great. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I want to talk about a motion that was tabled last September. You've seen the particular situation surrounding Domtar, which bought a few years ago Produits Forestiers Irrésolus through Agent Alton Pulp and Paper through that international company. So we asked for Mr. Jackson to appear to speak. That was what our motion was. And we were told that those facilities would be maintained here in Canada, but things are moving quickly. We have done a study on the forestry sector. We know that things are difficult. However, I think the biggest company in that sector in Quebec needs to answer our questions and appear before committee, and that's why I want to table the following motion. Given that Mr. Jackson Wijaya has appeared numerous times or been invited numerous times to appear before the committee, and because the Domtar plant in certain areas in Quebec have closed, and because the company had announced an investment plan over the past few months that pursuant to 108.2, that we asked the owner of Agent Pulp and Paper and only sole shareholder for Domtar appear before the committee to tell us about what they are going to do about their facilities in Quebec and in Canada, and that a report be prepared and tabled in the House pursuant to Section 109, and that we prepare that report. I know that there were discussions beforehand. I know that my colleague Cor might have a few changes to make, but it's something we talked about, so I don't see any objections. I just want to take 2 or 3 seconds to give you some context. Domtar closed facilities in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, my region, temporarily, but we know that there's probably a permanent closing coming. That does not mesh with what we were told in the past. We heard discussions during the transactions with Mr. Champagne, Minister François-Félix Champagne. The government seemed to indicate that it wanted guarantees. Now, Mr. Wijaya could, through his appearance, tell us whether those guarantees were met. There are all kinds of problems like that we see in Quebec that you'll see in the hydroelectric portion also. We also want our colleagues to understand that this is a serious issue. There are many employees who find themselves in precarious situations. The motion was tabled in September. We've given plenty of time to the business to send us what they intend to do. And 6 months later, things have not moved forward, and there are many political stakeholders from Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean who would like to hear what Mr. Wijaya has to say. So there you go.
Colleagues, as you know, this motion was put on notice some time ago. It is in order, and I will go to Mr. Hogan. Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Simard for his motion. It's an important discussion for this committee and timely because of the drafting of our report. Very serious issue. Always grateful for his advocacy for the forestry sector. It's a very important sector. We need to be here for affected communities and workers. There are an amendment that would change 2 clauses that I would like to propose, Chair. First would be to change summon to invite, as it's my understanding you would invite before summoning anyhow, so that seems to be the more neighborly way to begin this conversation with Domtar, if nothing else. And then the final clause, because we have a forestry report underway, I propose we replace the last paragraph with that this testimony be included in the committee's report on the forestry sector study. So that would be the amendment I move, Chair.
You've heard the amendment, Mr. Martel.
Ben moi, je voudrais savoir si Monsieur
Well, I'd like to know if Mr. Wijaya sends a member of his staff and it's not him appearing, what happens if he decides to send somebody in his stead? Mr. Simard, well, we know that our rules don't work that way. If we invite somebody to appear before committee, they can't send somebody else instead. That would not be acceptable to us to invite a minister, be invited here, and say, you know what, I'll send a parliamentary secretary. Nobody would agree to that. There have been some excellent examples in the past. So if we asked Mr. Jackson Wijaya to appear before a committee, that's because he owns many forestry sector companies, and it would be out of respect for us as Canadians to tell us what, and Quebecers, what his intentions are. That's quite clear. During his first week, we asked Mr. Pécresse during his first week as CEO of Rio Tinto to appear, and I'm sure he wasn't super pleased to do so, but he did appear. So that's out of respect for citizens of these countries also. So I would not agree to having somebody else appear in his stead. Mr. Martel, that's what I wanted to know. I know that Mario talked about it a lot, but I wanted to know whether we'd accept having somebody else appear in Mr. Reach's stead.
You've heard the motion, so we'll vote on the amendment. Mr. Clerk.
So I'm still waiting for the amendment, but if
Okay.
all the members agree on the wait, I got it. It's been said. Thank you very much.
Okay. Colleagues, do you need no. Everybody's good? Okay. On the amendment, Mr. Clerk.
All right, so on the amendment of Mr. Hogan, do I need to read it, or is everybody...
Ouais, je préférais leur lire pour plus de clarté.
I would prefer for it to be read for more clarity.
Comme la demande a été faite en français, je vais le lire en français. Donc, que le
As it was requested in French, I will read it in French. That the word summon be replaced by invite, and that the last paragraph be removed to be replaced by that this testimony be included in the committee's report on the forestry sector study, rather than what was there before. I will proceed with the vote. Just to clear things up before the vote, we're replacing summon by invite because we haven't yet invited him. So we're giving him the chance to accept our invitation, and if he does not do so, then we can summon him, just to clarify for everybody.
Mr. Danko? Monsieur Gay?
Yay.
Mr. Clark?
Yay.
Mr. Hogan?
Yay.
Mr. Tucker?
Yes.
Mr. Mallette?
Oui.
Mr. Martel?
Oui.
Mr. Rowe?
Oui.
Monsieur Simard?
Oui.
Unanimous.
Oui.
So we go to the main motion.
So, well, you need to say that the amendment is adopted.
Oh. The amendment is adopted. Now we'll go to the amended motion. Mr. Danko?
Yeah, it's on.
A quick question on the jurisdiction of this committee to summon or invite witnesses. So I'm not sure where this individual lives. I think he's overseas. Just so I'm clear what I'm voting on here, the jurisdiction of this committee to invite and summon witnesses, it can be anyone in the world? How does that work?
That sounds like a question for the clerk. Mr. Clerk?
The witness needs to be on Canadian soil to be summoned, but he can be invited from anywhere around the world.
Okay.
And just a follow-up to that. What are the repercussions if they choose not to attend?
that's a rule issue, Mr. Clerk, and then we'll go to Monsieur Simard. Go ahead.
So if the witness is summoned and refused to attend, if they are on Canadian soil, then the committee can can raise a question of privilege, table a report in the House, and then the House can be seized of the question.
Monsieur Simard.
Oui, simplement indiquer
Yeah.
pour
Just to indicate for Jean-Paul that we did that back in 2024. We didn't get to the end of the whole exercise because Domtar gave us explanations that satisfied us at the time, but Mr. Wijaya refused, and if he were to set foot on Canadian soil, we could have summoned him to appear before the committee. But, we often invite people who don't live in Canada. The Foreign Affairs Committee does this all the time.
Welcome, Monsieur Brunel Desep, as an observer today. But Mr. Clerk, I think we're ready for the amended motion vote.
All right, so on the motion as amended, does the committee want me to read the motion as amended? No? Perfect. So, Mr. Danko?
Yay.
Mr. Gay?
Oui.
Mr. Clark?
Oui.
Mr. Hogan? Mr. Tucker?
Yes.
Mr. Mallette?
Oui.
Mr. Martel?
Oui.
Mr. Rowe? Oui. Monsieur Simard?
The amended motion is passed. Thank you, colleagues. We will now go back to our delegations. And Monsieur Simard, you have 3 minutes and 20 seconds left on your
Oui,
time.
merci beaucoup.
We may have to condense a little
Oui.
bit, colleagues, at the ends because we've taken some time, but please proceed. Allez-y.
Oui, désolé pour le contre.
Yes, sorry to having to stop time and so on. It's not out of lack of respect, that's right, lack of respect, because we really do respect your expertise and everything you have to say. So, Mr. Teal, earlier you talked about the tax credits that are given for clean energy. And from what I understood, storage energy and storage capacity is not included. That's what you stated to Claude, correct?
So most storage technologies or some storage technologies are included, specifically thermal energy storage, which is, a same principle, but just a different application, primarily for industrial heat and power, is actually not included in the current suite of tax credits. It's, I could get into, all the digging that we've done as to how we got there, but it just seems to be, at the time when the tax credits were initially designed, the technology maybe was not at the readiness level in order to be included and therefore was excluded. And as we've worked through the process, to get these passed and implemented into legislation, it just hasn't yet gotten to the point where it is now included. So we've been advocating and doing, our due diligence with ministries on for the past number of years to hopefully push that change forward. My colleague Robert can speak to specifically how the technology is utilized. It's has a strong business case in Alberta, so I'll turn it over to him there.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So thermal energy storage is very similar to batteries or the kinds of electrical energy storage you would think of, except that it takes in electricity, but then it outputs the energy as useful heat instead of electricity back onto the grid. So the gap we're seeing in the Clean Economy ITCs is that in the explanatory notes to the Income Tax Act, the definition of energy storage specifically categorizes energy storage as electricity in, electricity out. And this is in contrast to other technologies, say like biomass, nuclear, concentrated solar thermal, carbon capture and storage, which all allow for electricity or heat out. So what the change we're seeking is for energy storage to be given the same treatment and allow it for also to be electricity or heat out. And thermal energy storage is predominantly used to provide electricity based as heat in industrial systems or district heating systems.
Si vous êtes en mesure de déposer.
Could you send us some complementary information in writing for purposes of drafting our report? That would be quite useful. And in closing, if you have any information on what's required in developing the critical minerals sector and also in terms of storage. You know, we have what's happening in China and so on. If you could provide us with a written brief, that would be very important, with a specific portion on the value chain and short-term viability.
Okay. Colleagues, we're going to our second round now. We are going to begin with Monsieur Mallet. 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, as you know, Northern Ontario's mining sector is expanding, which is increasing the demand for electrification. How can energy storage support large industrial loads while maintaining stable cost?
Robert, do you want to jump in there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. So one of the main drivers of cost on the electrical system is peak demand. So you'll need more wires to serve more peak demand. And as we're electrifying, that's adding more demand onto the grid. And presumably the mines and the mining sector, all else equal, would like to be on during peak as well. So the way energy storage helps with this is by having storage, whether it's electrical or thermal behind the meter. This is something that's quite common in Ontario already through the Industrial Conservation Initiative program. It allows those facilities during peak times to be powered by their energy storage instead of being powered by the grid. And that reduces peak demand and reduces costs for ratepayers by reducing the need for more wires.
Do current regulations, you can talk a little bit more about that, do current regulations and utility rate structures reward mines for deploying storage, or do they create barriers?
It varies by province. So Ontario has a fairly mature program, again, called the ICI program, or the Industrial Conservation Initiative, which does reward demand responsiveness during peak times. In my home province of Alberta, we're currently reforming our electricity rate structure, and that's something certainly that we're advocating for in the form of demand charges here, but it really does vary province by province. I think in many Crown provinces, the electricity rates traditionally have been a lot simpler, for sake of their electricity systems being simpler in form of regulation. So there's definitely work to do, but there is a good example here in Ontario.
What province would be the lead, and what province would be the lagger?
It's a good question. As I've said, I think Ontario is a leader here, and through the Industrial Conservation Initiative. I think Alberta, well, I don't want to throw the word laggard around without reason. I think there is work being done here to reform our rates and have more efficient use of the transmission system. But it's energy storage is still a relatively new technology, although it's being deployed at very heavy scales globally. But it's still relatively new, so we're still catching up with some regulations and rate structures, and that's a lot of our work here at Energy Storage Canada.
So, Mr. Teal, during the presentation, you mentioned, tax credit. Then you mentioned the second point, deployment programs. Could you expand on that, and can you bring examples that would help some of those areas that need more help?
Yeah, absolutely. So one program that has been particularly relevant to our members in terms of deployment of projects and assisting in trying to move things along has been the SREP program, as well as programs through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. So those fundamentally have served an incredible means to get storage projects deployed. I'll highlight specifically with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and its project involvement in one of the largest battery deployments that has happened here in the last number of years, which is the Oneida Energy Storage Project. It was connected to the grid last June or July and has been serving Ontario's grid and served Ontario's grid quite importantly during some of the peak demand cycles that we saw in the summer. And, without those programs through the CIB, those types of funding opportunities through SREPs, those types of projects would have never been developed. So those are the types of, examples at the federal level that are really contributing to provincial dynamics and energy system planning.
Thank you. If we were to scale up our energy storage capabilities, what parts of the value chain could realistically be in Northern Ontario, Northeastern Ontario?
Quick answer, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, right now in real time, we are seeing a pivot, from some EV auto transition manufacturing to grid scale battery development. The next door, I believe that's the correct name, an LG project here in Ontario with Stellantis was an example of that. Many of our member companies like Evlo, that Robert mentioned, are leaders in battery management system manufacturing. So there are some elements where we are already leading, and we should capitalize on those examples while seeking further opportunities for the rest of the supply chain.
Thank you. Mr. Danko, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Always good to see a representative from McMaster University at committee. As a proud McMaster engineering graduate myself, I've known Dr. Stevenson actually for, I think, probably about 30 years now, which is kind of crazy. So Dr. Novak, my first set of questions are for you. In your opening statement, you talked about international refurbishment of those CANDU reactors as an export opportunity for Canadian talent. You talked about SMRs, small medium reactors, design and export opportunities for Canada. And when I think about Hamilton, thinking about the opportunities for SMRs locally, the industrial center in Hamilton, electric arc furnace production, data centers, that kind of thing, along with district energy. People don't really know that Hamilton has a very robust district energy system. So my question to you is, how do you see kind of the future of nuclear, both domestically in Canada and abroad globally? What are the trends that we're seeing?
Thank you for the question, and always happy to support the parliamentary committees as I can. I think, first of all, globally, this is an immense build-out time for nuclear, where sort of the confluence of energy needs and energy expansion and EVs and data centers and heavy industry decarbonization, these things are all coming together in multiple jurisdictions. So when you look across the world, even at the COP summit several years ago, there was a pledge to triple nuclear capacity globally, which would move us from around 400 global reactors to over 1,000. So certainly globally there will be a large amount of construction and predominantly in the existing nuclear countries like France, UK, Canada, United States, and Asia. In terms of locally, I'm really excited about what the future holds in Canada. I mean, I've been a professor and in the nuclear industry for a long time, and I've been in several, valleys and hills. But now I see, alignment in federal government and in provincial government and municipal governments really on board with nuclear. And while I haven't seen any discussions centered around Hamilton, certainly the large industrial base and the requirements for large heat sources in, the hundreds of megawatts for steel production and for arc furnaces. And I look to examples, for example, in Texas, there's a Dow project to couple a nuclear reactor with a Dow chemical plant. And this would be the first time with the intimate marriage of sort of combined heat and power in an industrial facility. And I think that would be a tremendous example to look and build upon when we look at what's possible in regions like Hamilton and elsewhere in terms of both getting reliable electricity, but also the heat required for some of those processes. And that's really, I think, where nuclear's future lies, is that combined heat and power application to support both the grid and industry.
Thank you. And you said something really interesting there about kind of this confluence globally of more focus on electricity as an electric future, and then federal, provincial, municipal governments becoming more in alignment and seeing nuclear as a priority. This is kind of an open question for either of you, but as part of that transition, there are a couple federal initiatives. We talked about the clean energy tax credits, but another one is industrial carbon pricing. I want to open this up to either of you to respond to where do you see industrial carbon pricing fitting in encouraging that transition to a low carbon, net zero carbon future?
Maybe I'll take that first. I think it was even said earlier that our experience globally, when we look at deep decarbonization targets through taxes alone, in places like France, where there's large public discord as a result of increasing energy prices, certainly I think the carrot will be the route to success and less the stick. So I think looking at incentivizing decarbonization as opposed to taxation will help to keep public, with their eyes on the prize rather than getting discouraged from another form of sort of inflation in terms of energy pricing. So when I look globally at examples like that, it seems to be the best chance of success for both, growing economy and achieving, carbon reductions in industry and in the grid.
Yeah, that's all the time we have for you, Mr. Danko. And Mr. Teal, you can work something into one of your future answers if you wish. Colleagues, we have 3 more slots to go. Monsieur Simard, then Mr. Millette and Mr. Hogan. I'm going to have to reduce Mr. Millette and Hogan to 3 minutes each because we don't want to keep our other witnesses waiting. But we're going to start with Monsieur Simard, 2.5 minutes. Allez-y.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I don't want to get rhetorical, talking about whether Canada can be an energy superpower. Some witnesses have answered that question, for example, last week. But, Mr. Teal, one of my questions would be where Canada is on the energy storage front. I see it as an advantage that we have a huge player as Hydro-Québec that has expertise, that has developed expertise for hydroelectricity, and that it continues to develop technology around that. But on your end, I don't know if you have some models, but where is Canada in terms of supply chains? Compared to the U.S., for example, how about opportunities that we can see through the supply chain? I asked you about critical minerals earlier. I'll let you give us an answer, but I don't want to offload our work. But if you could give the committee some kind of table, perhaps, to explain where we are on that scale for the value chain, what our advantages and opportunities are, and possibly what some of our challenges are in Canada, that would allow us to think about things more deeply during the drafting of our report. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, happy to follow up with some of that information. As we've dug into provincial level policy here across Canada, some governments have already been tackling that issue of supply chain management and what opportunities exist. So I'm happy to provide. I have some detailed infographics and things like that as you guys prepare your report, we can certainly provide. And I did want to also take this opportunity, if I can, to hand it over to my colleague Robert to comment on the OBPS question that was raised previously as well.
Absolutely. So industrial carbon pricing, I think from our perspective, is a really important aspect in correctly kind of incentivizing energy storage deployment. So especially in market-based electricity systems like Ontario and Alberta, the OBPS, I think, correctly prices different kinds of generations. So say natural gas or energy storage or nuclear, and properly values the cleanliness that some of those technologies bring. I think when you compare to jurisdictions that don't have carbon pricing, like, for example, the US, what we see there is that there'll be deeper tax credits and more subsidy that is used instead. So kind of almost a reverse carbon price that will require more spending on the part of the government.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Monsieur Millette, 3 minutes.
Mr. Millette, 3 minutes.
So, with the renewable and nuclear set to supply 50% of the world's electricity demands by 2030, how can Canada leverage its nuclear energy capabilities to attract global markets?
I think one place, I look at the energy picture as a whole, energy demand across multiple sectors in terms of thermal energy, electricity energy. And one thing I tell my students and I tell people when I talk to them is no single technology will be able to meet the demands that are coming in a clean and reliable manner. It's going to take a mixture of large baseload generation like hydro in Quebec, nuclear in Ontario, combined with battery storage and renewables. And so as renewables grow and battery storage grows to complement and as baseload continues to rise, I actually see opportunities across all of the energy sectors. My expertise lies in nuclear, so I'd say that probably export opportunities in nuclear, not just there's the big flashy sale of selling a reactor, but we have hundreds of companies in Canada in the nuclear supply chain who are globally integrated into builds and refurbishments around the world. And I think the support for those companies is really going to be a key for ensuring their success as nuclear doubles or triples over the coming decades.
On that same line, do you think we should focus on our mining and exporting of uranium, or building and renovating existing nuclear reactors, a little bit, which you had started talking about?
Yeah, so I think Cameco and uranium mining in Ontario, across Canada, has been a huge success story. We supply some of the best grade uranium in the world to multiple countries, and that export opportunity will continue to grow. And in terms of the nuclear reactors, I think in Ontario we've done an excellent job refurbishing, making the best use of the construction we have already. But over the next decade, growth will certainly, the market operator in Ontario has said we will be short, 17 gigawatts of electricity. So hundreds of thousands of homes worth of electricity will need to be built in terms of new capacity in Ontario. And that will certainly require new constructions of new reactors, not just in Ontario, but in other provinces as their growth also catches up.
All right.
Just 20 seconds.
I'm good, Mr. Chair.
And wrapping up, Mr. Hogan for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses here. I always learn something when I talk to all of you who I've met before. Mr. Novak, we haven't met, though, but I do really want to dig in on some of the things you've said, particularly around workforce challenges. I think people don't always appreciate how many people projects in the nuclear space can employ. And as you noted, we have multiple projects being considered domestically, and we also want to support and grow our ability to export that expertise and the products, the sales and technical services, as you put it in your opening. So, 17 gigawatts, hundreds of thousands of homes. That's also tens of thousands of employees and workers that will need to be trained up. Can you give the committee a sense of the mix and the scale? Like what percent are going to have university degrees versus trade school versus training on site plus some other combination of skills? And your thoughts on where we should be putting our focus as a federal government?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think, the details would be in our workforce study here from McMaster, as well as a comparable study done by the Canadian Nuclear Association. But, in general, today's nuclear sector employs about 50 to 80,000 people, depending on, which parts of the supply chain you credit. And doubling nuclear capacity will double, almost double those numbers. So we're looking at growth, 50, 100,000 new workers across Canada. Many are in the skilled trades. If you wanted a rough number, approximately 70% are in trades and skilled trades. And so certainly that is an area that gets a lot of attention because it's a very large number of new people, and you couple that with growth in mining and oil and gas and so on, and it's really the same skill sets, the pipe fitters and welders and these kind of hardcore skilled trades are really going to be an area where Canada needs to pay attention. But 30% will be the engineers and scientists and subject matter experts that require university degree or even advanced degrees, PhD degrees. And in these areas, the training time frame is much longer. It takes longer to generate, a PhD, a subject matter expert. And so it's important to start that skill up today to be ready for 5 or 10 years from now, because generating new experts takes a long time.
Thank you. And just maybe with my last 30 seconds, the chair tells me, in terms of interoperability on the advanced degree side, like, is this a thing where we can take somebody who is a mechanical engineer, for example, with a focus in oil and gas and reskill and retrain for nuclear, or what's that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for a long time, the nuclear sector thought that would be a pathway for gaining new employees and experienced people is sort of sector to sector transitions like what you mentioned. But I think what we've seen over the last several years is potential growth in the oil and gas sector and export markets and so on. So I think holistically, when you look at spending and growth in defense and oil and gas and nuclear, it's sort of you're looking for the same people in multiple sectors, and that's really, I think, an integrated sort of federal perspective on that would really help ensure that the universities are set to meet the demand.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Hogan, and particularly a big thank you to our witnesses today. I think you saw that my colleagues were very engaged in the dialogue, very stimulating dialogue indeed. And as was suggested earlier, we do invite you to submit briefs if there were some points you think weren't covered, or you want to reemphasize some of the points you made. We would welcome that. So thank you to our presenters, thank you, colleagues, and we're going to suspend for about 5 minutes while we get ready for our second panel. We'll resume the meeting as we start our second panel. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Adam Legg, there you are. We just came off two virtual witnesses. Adam Legg, President of the Business Council of Alberta, welcome. And Eric Nuttall, Partner, Senior Portfolio Manager at 9 Point Partners. Just a few comments for the benefit of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And you'll each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we'll open the floor to questions. And Mr. Legg, we're going to start with you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with the committee today. I'll focus on what is the largest barrier to Canada supplying the world with energy. That is the Impact Assessment Act, aka Bill C-69, and major permitting systems which stand in the way of billions of dollars of investment and ultimately improve prosperity for Canadians. Simply put, the process, timeline, and political uncertainties inherent in this act and federal permitting systems are such that few companies will risk the time and cost to apply for approval. There are 6 key barriers embedded within the act and system. 1, late-stage politicized decision-making creates unpredictability for a years-long high-cost process. 2, duplicative reviews and regulators because of departmental and jurisdictional overlap. 3, excessive timelines which are unpredictable and prone to delays that impact construction timelines. 4, regulators' low risk tolerance causes reviews to stray from focusing on mitigating only the largest and unique material impacts. 5, uncoordinated post-impact assessment permitting by multiple regulators can delay construction. And 6, lack of consultation clarity, which is unpredictable Indigenous consultations, weakens reconciliation efforts, Indigenous participation, and investor confidence. I do applaud the current efforts of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada to improve upon the existing regime. Bill C-5 approach, however, creates a dual-track system of project winners and losers without fixing Canada's broader approval challenges. What's needed is a comprehensive legislative overhaul of the Act to enable all major projects in Canada to be reviewed and approved quickly, efficiently, with predictability, and without political interference. What does an ideal system look like? Well, in the next 2 months, the Business Council of Alberta will release a major report on project approval reform, and we'll provide that report to this committee. The following 6 key changes will create an optimal impact assessment and major project process. 1, ensure projects are reviewed by the right level of government and regulator by requiring projects built in a province be reviewed by that province as of right, moving approvals for all federal pipeline projects to the Canada Energy Regulator under the CER Act, and ensuring a one project, one review, one decision. 2, removing late-stage political decisions by adopting a two-stage project authorization process where Stage 1, early political decision on whether a project is in the national public interest, and Stage 2, an independent apolitical determination of how a project can proceed by the regulator. 3, reduce timelines and stop their extension by creating an absolute maximum timeline of 2 years under the IAA, with efforts to shorten that to be competitive with the United States. Shortening the CER timelines to a maximum of 250 days, with even shorter timelines for lower risk projects, and eliminating opportunities for political interference to extend timelines. 4, right-size the scope of reviews by reintroducing the concept of standing and focusing only on unique risks associated with a project. 5, streamline permitting and conditions by making the designated regulator responsible for coordinating all federal permit reviews and decision-making and aligning permit decisions with the final decision and impact assessment. 6, clarify Indigenous consultation by ensuring Crown consultation properly considers and utilizes businesses' engagement as fulfilling aspects of the Crown's duty, ensuring consultation aligns with the maximum review timeline, and building capacity for Indigenous communities to participate in, benefit from projects, and if desired, own an equity stake. We also ask government not to forget about cultural change. The system was designed to ensure bad things didn't happen when major projects were built. Thousands of public servants were hired to carry out that mandate, but they viewed and continue to view their role as limited to their own zone of expertise or responsibility. This has created challenges that have kept us and risk keeping us from achieving goals of prosperity and more meaningful economic reconciliation. We need the process and public servants to view project approvals also through an economic and prosperity lens. Canada and the public service require a culture that ensures we build big and ambitious things, and we build them quickly and safely for the sake of Canadians' well-being and prosperity. These changes, both real and cultural, will enable project proponents and investors to have confidence in Canada as a place to invest while still protecting environmental, social, economic, and Indigenous rights and domains. If we wish to enable Canada to grow its economy, diversify our global trading network, and make Canadians better off, these actions and changes must be made urgently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lake.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président. Peut-être.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. I believe that our friends at Interpretation there found it, the pace quite fast, so I think they need a little breather. So if we could just slow down the pace a little bit. Apologies.
Noted that, Mr. Legg. Thank you. You did finish in plenty of time, so in the Q&A we can have a more measured pace, but we're on to you, Mr. Nuttall, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for the invitation to give testimony on the critical need for Canada to increase its energy exports, an absolute imperative for both our energy sector and for Canada at large. I'm going to apologize in advance if some of my remarks seem overly blunt. I am no politician, but it's time for someone on this topic to finally speak the unvarnished truth. I come before you with an urgent call to action. We live in a world where the demand for oil continues to set record highs, and late last year, the International Energy Association stated under their base scenario that the demand for oil will grow until at least 2050. Despite decades of future demand growth, the world is hurtling towards a supply crisis. In 2012, oil production from U.S. shale began its ascent, and since then, U.S. shale has accounted for 117% of total non-OPEC production due to production falling in other countries, making it by far the single largest source of incremental barrels of the past decade plus. Importantly, it's now estimated that due to geologic maturity and investor demands, that U.S. shale production has now peaked. What does this mean? The rise of U.S. shale was extremely destructive to the oil market, resulting in several price crashes, an exodus of investor interest, and ultimately a meaningful drop in spending on exploration and long lead development projects. As a result, not only is the United States oil production forecast to peak this year, but so too is total non-OPEC production, with 75 of the 79 non-OPEC countries now in permanent decline. Why does this matter? Non-OPEC production accounts for a staggering 68% of global oil supply. Normally, this would not have been the profound challenge that it is, as OPEC has historically had meaningful excess spare capacity, offering a form of insurance against declines elsewhere. This is no longer the case. Since April of last year, OPEC has unwound most of their curtailed production, shut in during the demand shock of COVID, and similarly to non-OPEC countries, has not been investing in meaningful incremental capacity. We estimate that OPEC only has 1.5 million barrels per day of excess spare capacity, which amounts to a meager 18 months of demand growth. The world has never before faced the energy challenge it faces now. Given an incremental 19 million barrels of demand growth by 2050, accelerating decline rates from existing fields, peaking U.S. shale, peaking non-OPEC production, and imminent exhaustion of OPEC spare capacity, I pose this simple question. Where will the necessary future production come from? This is where Canada comes in. Canada is gifted with the fourth largest oil reserves in the world and produces 5.5 million barrels per day to the highest environmental standards of anywhere on the planet. We have nothing, I repeat, nothing to apologize for. This production benefits all Canadians from coast to coast through royalties and taxes. Canadian Natural Resources, Suncor, and Cenovus, Canada's three largest oil companies, collectively paid $16.9 billion in royalties and taxes in 2025. This compares to $16.2 billion in taxes paid in 2025 by Canada's six largest banks. Despite this windfall, we have for the past 10-plus years purposefully and intentionally practiced economic self-flagellation, inhibiting our oil and gas sector with penalizing legislation and excess costs, all rooted in energy ignorance and a misguided notion that Canada can play a pivotal role in lowering global emissions. No other country in the world would do this to themselves, and all we have accomplished is willingly cede market share to other countries, many of whom have far, far lower environmental standards at a profound economic cost to ourselves. This insanity must end. So what should we do? Canada today has modest excess pipeline capacity, and through several expansion projects will increase pipeline capacity by up to 770,000 barrels per day by 2030. This is not enough. It is crucial to maintain excess pipeline capacity as the price of all 5.5 million barrels per day of production is set off of the one marginal barrel. 1 barrel of production more than pipeline capacity, and the price of all 5.5 million barrels per day falls. We are now up against the clock, as it is estimated that it will take at least 8 years to build a new major pipeline, taking us beyond the 2020-30 timeframe and risking a repeat of widening price differentials that would significantly impact revenue, royalties, and taxes. We estimate that a single 1 million barrel per day pipeline would generate an additional $5 billion in new royalties every year. This would be enough to hire 13,000 new doctors, enough to provide health care to almost 17 million Canadians. 8-hour wait times with our children in an emergency room is a choice. Failing inadequate infrastructure is a choice. Neighborhoods such as mine in Toronto that are getting burglarized on a weekly basis due to insufficient police budgets is a choice, and we do not have to live like this. We have an enormous opportunity in front of us, and to seize it, all we need to do is recognize one inalienable truth. The world needs more Canadian energy. With the looming supply crisis in the years ahead, we are only one of 4 countries that can rise to meet the call. In a world where, despite what we are told, not a single purchaser of oil cares about the barrel's carbon footprint, but rather its affordability, availability, and reliability. More Canadian oil production means a higher quality of living for all of us, and to not recognize this generational opportunity and to continue to impair our industry by not making new pipelines an urgent national priority, backed with action versus more and more talk, would be the equivalent of economic treason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nuttall. I gave you a little extra time there. And we are now going to go to questions, and we are going to start with Mr. Tucker for 6 minutes. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Nuttall, at the last meeting of this committee, Lisa Bayton from CAP highlighted the changes of the methane regulations in the MOU with Alberta will cost the industry over $14 billion. This is the same government that lost $670 billion in major natural resource projects, including the West to East Pipeline and the pipeline to Northern Pacific. Do you have faith that this grand bargain gives certainty to investors when over the last decade this government has continued to keep projects in the ground?
I've renamed the Grand Bargain the Grand Ransom because it appears obvious. I think that the current government is tying a new pipeline to initiatives such as the Pathways, which is, by most recent cost estimates, roughly a $24 billion project. You point out additional costs on this industry is a negative for several reasons, the largest of which is capital is very mobile. I run the largest energy fund in Canada, and so we have a choice every single day. Where do we invest our clients' dollars? Is it the United States or Canada? And it should seem obvious that there are two jurisdictions that are taking two different approaches. I worry that incremental costs onto this sector, especially at a time of volatile oil prices, will disincentivize the flow of funds back to Canada, harming our sector's ability to grow production at a time when there's a global call for incremental supply.
Read Mark Carney's book?
I admit I bought it on Kindle and skimmed it with keyword search.
So it is difficult for investors and Canadians to square where 7 years ago he was professing that we had to keep it all in the ground. And now, to get votes, he's saying something different. But it seems like the investors are not believing either version of Mark Carney. My colleague, MP Stubbs, put forward a motion that the Canadian Sovereignty Act, which would repeal Bill 69 and Bill C-48, the federal industrial carbon tax, which the U.S. does not impose on its country federally, and the oil and gas cap that will kill 54,000 jobs and cost $21 billion to the Canadian GDP by 2032. What signal does it send to investors like yourself when Liberals claim they want to build a pipeline, but they vote against the motion to repeal anti-development laws like the No New Pipeline, Bill C-69, and the tanker ban, C-48?
Let me address the bad and then I'll finish with the good. The past 10 years have been devastating towards global interest in investing not only in Canada, but in the Canadian oil and gas sector. And I think every major economic statistic validates that view. I think there is growing optimism on the part of the oil and gas industry, and my source would be speaking directly to many oil and gas executives, that the tone has meaningfully improved. We have gone from a country that seems to want to shoot itself both in the foot and the head simultaneously to one that is recognizing the impact that oil and gas has on our economy, and at least through words is signaling a growing championing of that. I think there remains a lot of skepticism still in terms of whether much talk, a year of it, will actually translate into action. We're very, very hopeful for that. This is a sector that is on the cusp of a major, I think, bull market, and all we need to do is for government to get out of the way and eliminate. You mentioned several pieces of legislation. I would quote several CEOs of major Canadian midstream and pipeline companies that have said, and again, going back to my earlier theme of investment capital is highly mobile, that they are preferring still, even with all of the talk of the past year, to allocate investment dollars to the United States versus Canada.
And there's an old saying that money talks and bullshit walks, and we're seeing this with the Canadians incorporating more companies in the States last year than Canada, which has never happened in the history of our country. So entrepreneurs are starting companies in the States and not Canada, which is a travesty, and I think it weakens our country, obviously. TC Energy CEO says that U.S. will continue to be where we'll invest because the returns we can earn in the United States are significantly more attractive than they are in Canada. Canada has seen $54 billion in capital leave to the United States from Canada since this Prime Minister came to office. The United States administration has shortened permitting times to 28 days, while the Liberal government continues to keep the anti-development legislation in place. What kind of signal does that send to investors if these regulations are kept in place?
For at least 10 years, Canada has been the place where good projects go to die. We're, again, optimistic that under the new leadership that those dark days are behind us. I think the surest signal that can be sent to the market is to eliminate legislation that very clearly is either antiquated or was erroneous in the first place. C-69 very clearly needs to be absolutely repealed. To have such things like a gender-based analysis on the construction of a pipeline, in speaking with CEOs of pipeline companies, they themselves do not quite understand what exactly that is. To have a ban on tankers and believe that the private sector will step up to build a $35 or $40 billion pipeline, as some have labeled it, a pipeline to nowhere. It's very easy steps that I implore and hope that for the benefit of all Canadians in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, coast to coast, very, very simple decisions can be made, and I hope that it will be made on an expedited basis, because it is still impairing the desire of investors to invest in this country, and it sends a negative signal.
One last question.
That's your time, Mr. Tucker. We're going to go on to Mr. Hogan for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Legg, I have some questions that I want to direct towards your way. You were discussing a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities we had to fix some of the challenges. I just want to say off the top, totally agree. The oil and gas sector has been an incredible driver of prosperity. The Prime Minister has said the regulatory framework needs to improve. One of the things the Major Project Office has to do is identify ways to improve regulatory processes. But, I was struck on your list of the 6, 5 of them we could at least make meaningful progress without even legislative change. Cultural change, regulatory change could get to some of them. And yes, certainly we could look at legislative changes too. And I do kind of feel myself personally that incremental improvement is improvement. We don't want to wait and let perfect be the enemy of the good. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on some of the things that you think that we could be doing right now, just from even a process and cultural point of view, to be more efficient, to meet the Prime Minister's goal of having faster approvals and faster action.
Thank you for the question. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I've led and transformed a number of organizations where that rings so true. So I think we can have all of the regulatory change, all the ambition in the world, but if it isn't being driven down into the public service, that these projects are in the national interest, they are going to lift Canadians up in terms of their ability to afford daily things like groceries, housing, etc. And will increase Canada's ability to compete for capital, as my fellow witness has identified. We won't make meaningful progress. So I think the cultural shift needs to happen first and foremost, and it's going to take time and repeated efforts. And frankly, those that can't get on the bus of expedited and competitive regulatory environments and investment climates should be shown the door. In terms of some of the other pieces, frankly, the move to allow provinces to adjudicate and regulate the projects that are happening within their provinces is a step that's happening, but should be happening as of right. That does require a change in the legislation, but by practice, that should be happening today. And in many provinces, it actually is. The shift to having all of the pipelines in Canada approved by the energy regulator is also a needed change legislatively, but I believe that should be happening immediately. And frankly, there is purview within the Impact Assessment Act for the agency and other regulators to limit the scope of reviews, where in the past they have often taken the maximum amount of time. They have added interesting academic queries to the regulatory approval process when they have really no material bearing on the actual development of a major project. So, that's a few things that could be done immediately, but for wholesale change, for Canada to be ultimately competitive with our primary competitor, the United States, which, as pointed out, is moving to some timelines as quickly as 28 days, we will need to see a combination of both procedural and legislative change.
Thank you. And one of the suggestions that you made was, and by the way, I should say, around the ever-expanding consultations, so right, that's the space I worked in before I worked for the government. And yeah, it was not even a yes or a no, it was a maybe and let's go back, and somebody felt not engaged, and that clearly needs to be tightened up. But in terms of, you made a comment about using business engagement as fulfilling aspects of Crown's duty. And so I'm intrigued by that for two reasons. One is I would be concerned about whether that would be durable in a court, and I'm wondering if there's any analysis your organization's done on that. And second, is there any precedent for that in energy projects that I'm just not aware of?
Well, in terms of the first question around durability, as long as the consultation process that's been embarked upon by business, which is very important because they have a lot of the relationships in the communities that a project will be either operating in or impacting through development. So business can actually be a very important function and functionary in that activity, as long as some of those engagements are properly documented, noted, and recorded. Then they can be considered as part of the duty to consult. In terms of examples of projects, you know, the work that Trans Mountain did, Ian Anderson, through a lot of his engagement with the Indigenous communities along that route, was a substantive part of consultation. And in fact, many instances there have been, or some instances I should say, where the Crown has in effect sort of discharged its duty to the business community, given their engagements that they've had with the with Indigenous communities. So it is possible, and it's an important part of all parties, but particularly the Crown fulfilling its duty to consult.
Okay. Last question that I had, which I guess I'll open up to both of you here. So when we talk about the overall global context, so first of all, I completely believe demand for Canadian oil can continue to grow regardless of the scenario, whether demand goes up, down, sideways, because demand is always shifting. People want to have a variety. They don't want to be beholden to one particular market. Lots of opportunity for Canada long term. Canadian oil and gas production did grow 34% in the last 10 years. Globally, that increase was 6%. But if I'm understanding, there was an opportunity for more. What do you envision as potentially the upside that's available?
So, Mr. Hogan, we're out of time, but I will allow a quick answer from both of our witnesses. Quick answer.
It's fair. Canadian growth rate have exceeded the global average. I think the largest reason for this is we're imbued with more. The quantum of growth is much larger than other countries, many of which are in permanent decline. Also, people such as myself has been inhibiting that growth rate as well, because there's been a call for companies to prioritize return of capital over production growth at a time of enormous volatility in the oil price.
Great. And a quick one from you, Mr. Legg.
If I interpret the question, MP Hogan, it's about, is there a global demand for Canadian energy product?
And it's okay, Chair. We can pick it up in other rounds. Yeah.
Good, and we will now go on to Mr. Simard. But Mr. Simard, before we do, I just want to welcome Mr. Gasparo and Mr. Lloyd to the committee. I believe you're an observer, Mr. Lloyd, but Mr. Gasparo, you will be an active member, I understand, of the committee for this round. So, Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes. Allez-y.
Merci.
6 minutes, Mr. Simard. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before starting my time, I want to make sure our guests have interpretation in their coming through. Is it working for you? Do you hear me? No, as usual.
Voilà. À un moment donné, au lieu.
All right. At some point, instead of hearing my voice, you will hear the harmonious, lovely voice of the interpreters. Always fantastic, always kind, says Mr. Simard.
Toujours important de s'en.
It's always important to get along with the interpreters when you're francophone here. All right, it's working? Excellent. During your statements, during your opening statements, confused me a little bit. I'll explain to you why. You talked about the politicized decision-making and low tolerance to risk, for example, apolitical decision-making and so on, because I find it a little strange because, as you know, your very appearance here is political, so asking politicians to, in their decision-making process, make apolitical decisions is a bit counterintuitive. Now, the question we have here, as part of our work at committee, is to know whether building gas and oil infrastructure is done in the collective interest. You are defending the interests of your members. That's political. Now, the interests of your members, your pairs well with the collective interest. And I'm not convinced that it is in the public interest to build oil and gas infrastructure. And I'll explain to you why, and then you can respond afterwards. But the last pipeline that was built in Canada was Trans Mountain, and it cost us $34 billion, almost or more, a little more than $800 per person, including the children. And your colleague was saying, well, if you want less time spent in hospital waiting rooms, we have to invest in this kind of infrastructure. I think it should be the opposite. Perhaps that $800 plus could have been invested in reducing those wait times. Now, people should maybe, and your companies could invest in their own infrastructures. If they had had to build it, they would have built it. I mean, we are still paying $7 per barrel for those pipelines, for the oil coming through those pipelines. And now, if you look at the ownership structure of the large oil and gas industries, we see that 60% are American companies. When we're trying to cut ourselves off and sever these close ties from the American markets, this is difficult. Now, I'm just not convinced, all of that to say, I'm not convinced that it's in the public interest to build oil and gas infrastructure. And I'm not even talking about the environmental aspect. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. How is it in the public interest to build that oil and gas infrastructure?
Thank you, MP Simard. I think to the extent that my fellow witness here came armed with the actual economic impacts of taxes and royalties that have been paid by the large oil sands companies. Oil and gas is the largest export sector of this country. It is the largest tax-paying sector of this country. It is the most productive from an economic multiplier sector in this country. So the economic benefits of growing that sector, growing the production, getting more production to other non-U.S. markets in addition to continuing to supply the U.S., I think are relatively clear given the economic impact of the industry to this country, the wages that are earned in Alberta that contribute to everything from pension to equalization payments. So it is a vital and imperative industry that it is in the public interest to continue to grow production and support that through new transportation infrastructure to new markets. The Trans Mountain pipeline returned $1 billion to the federal government in its first year of operation because of that expanded capacity and export takeaway capacity through its operations. Imagine if we had multiple opportunities to expand production and grow exports through other pipelines. We would have incremental returns and taxes and royalties that have been that are earned. So I guess I would argue that the economic impacts of the oil and gas sector and growing our trade capacity with other markets is a strong and compelling one. And we have lost out with the cancellations of everything from Northern Gateway to Energy East on 1.6 million barrels a day of production, and therefore taxation and royalties on that production. So we have a huge opportunity lost, and hopefully we can find ways to grow that into the future.
If I may, and with respect, Monsieur Simard, where do you think your province's $17 billion per year of transfer payments come from? It's funded from.
Je vais vous arrêter là.
I'll stop you there because you have to look at the overall numbers. I mean, if you want to talk about equalization, well, Quebec's, if you look at it differently, Quebec is sending more to Alberta than the other way. Now, I talked to you about purchasing the pipeline. I've been here since 2019. I've seen the fund to reduce emissions, which was supposed to reduce that. The Environment Commissioner came to tell us that it was a pure grant, it turns out, to the oil and gas sector. And now the main beneficiaries are shareholders, and I'll get back to this later. But I'm pleased to hear you today.
Can work a response into one of the other responses to another member. Colleagues, we're a little bit behind. I've been probably too permissive today in allowing folks to go over, including some of our witnesses. So we have Monsieur Martel, Mr. Clark, Monsieur Simard again. I'm going to reduce Mr. Tucker, you, and Mr. Gasparo to 3 minutes at the end. So prepare your questions accordingly. You're devastated, I know, but that's what we do in this committee. We devastate folks. All right, to the speaker, I hope. Yes, yes. Monsieur Sima, we're going to. Sorry, Mr. Martel, we're going to go. I was enjoying your interaction so much. I want to go back to you too. Mr. Martel, 5 minutes.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur
Yes, thank you
Nantel,
very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Nantel, I'd like to hear what you have to say if you have any answer to Mr. Simard to his last question, if you'd like to elaborate on what he was saying.
Thank you. I'd be happy to. I commend the prior government for stepping up and seeing TMX through. It was a major insurance policy to protect the largest industry in Canada, worth $100 billion per year, 25% of our net exports. The only reason why that action took place was the years of disastrous legislation that made private companies leave this country as they continued to leave, not just on oil and gas, but others. So that insurance policy, I think it's very simplistic to look at it solely through the terms of toll rates per year. It also, if you look at the decrease in the differential, the discount for Canadian heavy oil, it's reduced that by at least $10 per barrel. And by rough math that I just did, that's roughly at least $1.8 billion per year in additional value. Directly from that are royalties and taxes that go to build, incremental hospitals and schools and roads, et cetera, every single year. So it's an ongoing an annuity. And honestly, I'm staggered that as a citizen, I need to explain why it's important to champion the most important sector of the Canadian economy. The reasons for that should be abundantly obvious.
Monsieur Nantel, est-ce que vous croyez que le
Mr.
gouvernement...
Nantel, do you believe that the government is doing serious work through its act? Do you believe the government is doing serious work with Bill C-5 when they can't even get rid of C-69? What should make us believe that C-5 will increase the speed of development projects?
I remain hopeful that rather than taking the course of strategic exemptions from existing legislation, we should admit our mistakes. I have 3 young children, and I teach them, bad choices lead to bad outcomes. And so if you can learn from your mistake, as we should, recognize that certain bills are not serving them and are making this country unbelievably uncompetitive, just get rid of them. I'm incredibly hopeful that our current Prime Minister is going to follow through on much of the positive talk. Industry is very much behind him. I hope for a Team Canada approach. I'm extremely worried about the path that this country is on, and it's oil and gas that can get us off of that path. So I'm hopeful that we'll see action in the coming months. I'm hopeful that the grand ransom or grand bargain or whatever with the Alberta government yields fruit. Remain optimistic on that.
Tous les pays présentement.
All countries seems to be running after the black oil, the black gold, as we call it, rather. Now, over the years, we have all kinds of legislation that has settled in. Why are we so behind on our exports? Was there not enough, planning? Nobody's talking about the pipeline that could have gone under the St. Lawrence, for example, and I can't believe that we still don't have any way to get oil to Asia and so on. I feel like we're 30, 40 years behind.
I would agree. When you look at us as having the 4th largest oil reserves in the world, our production should be meaningfully higher. And I said in my written commentary, We have willingly ceded market share to other countries to our demise and their benefit. And so why is that? I think it's been a result of extraordinarily poor leadership of the past 10 years, this mistaken belief that this is a sunset industry and that we need to transition, those poor oil field workers and find them a job apparently at a battery plant. This is not a sunset industry. And so I'm hopeful that under the new leadership, with a much more optimistic tone, there will be a realization that the world needs more Canadian oil, needs more Canadian natural gas. And by embracing that and providing an environment which is much more conducive to investment, we can reclaim a lot of the market share that we have willingly ceded to other countries.
That's your time, Mr. Martel. And we will go on to Mr. Clark for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I really appreciate your testimony on this subject. Mr. Legge, I wanted to ask you a bit. You talked about regulatory certainty and duplication and overlap between provinces and the federal government, and I certainly think you're on the right track there. That's obviously, I think, a pain point for lots of industries, obviously not just in energy. But, as we speak, the federal government's working on one project, one review agreements with various provinces and territories, Ontario, New Brunswick, BC, so far, Manitoba and PEI, imminently it appears, hopefully all 13 jurisdictions sooner rather than later. Is that the kind of approach that you think we should be taking, or is there something that we're not doing there that would make it an even better approach in your view?
The way the Impact Assessment Act is that it does require substitution agreements with other provinces. What we propose is that the Act be changed such that it is, as of right, it is legally embedded, that if a project is happening in a province, that it is that provincial government or regulator that approves it. It does not have to go through a substitution agreement. It does not have to go through, and the substitution agreements require that the federal government is comfortable with the provincial government's regulatory approval process. It should be deemed that what a province, given its powers under the Constitution to oversee its resource development, etc., that is acceptable as of right. And so we would like to see not having to go through the path of individual substitution agreements by province, but that the Act be amended such that it is, as of right, the province's responsibility if that project is happening in that province.
Right. If we did get to substitution agreements with all jurisdictions, which certainly is the intention, would that be, not everything you hope for, but would that be a reasonable substitute in your view?
It's progress, but again, we don't want to necessarily have we don't want to have any of the projects first come into the federal regime and then be deemed to go into the provincial regime with a substitution agreement or not. It should just automatically default to the provincial. So there are a couple of steps. It's better than the existing structure. It's better than the existing regime under C-69. But there are improvements that can be made that will make that whole process flow faster with more certainty and as of right allowing each province to determine its regulatory domains.
Understood. And Mr. Nuttall, if I could just ask you about the MOU between Alberta and the federal government. You mentioned in your opening statement, and then you just mentioned it at the end there, talking to Mr. Martel. Could you just summarize your views on that agreement as it stands right now and how you think it can impact the sector?
I think as investors, we're still waiting a little more clarity on the actual details. I think the broad understanding as it stands now is the government is supportive of a new pipeline, which is terrific. I think we've spoken to the economic merits to that. Our understanding is that is being tied to the construction of the Pathways project, which is roughly a $24 billion project intended to make incremental production net zero, at least on a Scope 1 basis. Broadly speaking, I would say we're opposed to the Pathways project. We are the only jurisdiction, like the oil sands are 0.1% of global CO2 emissions. And so the notion that we can solve the global climate crisis, if I'm going to use those words, by impairing such a massively important part of our economy, I think is extremely simplistic. It's interesting, when we look at just new coal plant construction in China, just over the next 3 years, that will totally overwhelm all of the CO2 emissions from Canada. So the additional burdens that we're placing on a sector, which is the engine of growth, it can literally lift millions of Canadians out of poverty at a time when other countries, other oil-producing jurisdictions are swinging against the fallacies of, net zero 2050, et cetera. It's essentially just Europe and Canada that are now embracing that. And Europe is not an economic model that I think we want to embrace.
Right. I mean, I would note also that China is doing a massive amount of solar and wind and lots of other renewables as well, but we don't need to litigate everything all at once.
Just have 20 seconds.
Oh, geez. Can you touch really quickly on LNG exports? The study is about exports. We shipped our first LNG to Asia last year. I'm sure you got 7 seconds now, but your views on that?
Yeah, quick response, please.
Thank God. Yeah, we embrace more LNG from Canada. We're hopeful we'll be exporting 6 BCF a day by 2031, 2032.
Thank you. Monsieur Simard, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, Mr. Simard. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, 2.5 minutes. I can take 5. I'll wait for the start of my time. Okay, I'd like to go back to your comment, Mr. Nuttall, which indicates, according to you, that Quebec is benefiting from all this largesse from Alberta, which I find interesting because what we hear. Well, actually, when I started 2019, my Conservative colleagues kept telling us that Quebec did not use any oil and gas from Alberta, and I guess they had to change what they were saying when they saw the actual numbers and the actual graphs. Now, from 2070 to 2015, the federal government's numbers show us that we invested $70 billion collectively to make the oil sands technology more efficient. So that's how much we invested, $70 billion at the federal level. And if you take that 20%, that's $14 billion from Quebec. Do you know what percentage was invested by Alberta in Quebec's dam and hydroelectricity systems? Not a single penny. Too bad. Well, we had heard by previous Quebec premiers in the past, if I had offered to Quebec what I gave, or it's a prime minister who said, what if I had offered to Quebec what I had offered to Alberta in terms of federal assistance, I would have won all of the seats in Quebec. And there's something, and that's something that we heard from a prime minister. Now, from 2002 to 2007, Quebec lost 55,000 jobs in its manufacturing sector because of the fluctuating oil prices that made Quebec less competitive. And Quebec buys oil from Alberta, and you are telling us that through equalization, you are paying for our public services, and it's like you're telling us that we're on social assistance on the part of Alberta. But that's why we have serious doubts when you show up here and demand that and request that the government roll out the red carpet for oil and gas projects. And the role of elected members here is to represent their citizens, even if you don't like that. And among those citizens are people from Quebec who are not interested in seeing any of their money go to the oil and gas sector. So you can answer in writing, please.
Time is the members on how they wish to use it. Perhaps in another question you might respond, but we are running out of time. And I will go to Mr. Rowe. Mr. Rowe, 3 minutes, but I understand you may want to share some of your time with Mr. Lloyd.
Well, thank you for having me here today. My first question is for Mr. Nuttall. You mentioned transfer payments has been an interesting topic here. Newfoundland and Labrador was a have-not province for a long time, perhaps since Confederation. But under Conservative governments, we leaned into the oil revenues, we leaned into our offshore oil. 25% of our GDP now comes from oil and gas. We are slightly a have-not province now, and we've had to depend on recently under this new Liberal government because of these anti-oil regulations that have just dried up investment in our offshore. We've now had to rely on transfer payments once again. I'm just curious if would you like to expand on the statement you made earlier about transfer payments and its connection to oil and gas? And more specifically, is there a business case for Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore natural gas and perhaps an opportunity for us to come off of the transfer payments once again and be self-sustaining?
Maybe if I can refocus the conversation. I think we need to all agree on a few basic facts. The Canadian oil and gas sector is the heartbeat of the Canadian economy. It generates $100 billion of GDP per year and is roughly 25% of our net exports. So that's the basis. It is true that your province is an excellent example of how the economic benefits can generate and flow through to their citizens. So when I think of other provinces who are not adopting that and perhaps have significant natural gas onshore shale deposits north of one of the largest export markets on the planet, I think perhaps they could be doing better. In the world that I envision in the next several years, Canadian companies have not been going onshore. Again, we have the luxury of having a lot of different good projects to go after, specifically in the oil sands, some conventional oil projects. I can envision a world in the next couple of years where the future of this sector will be offshore. It'll be the oil sands, and it will be offshore. So I see a very optimistic future for you.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I am going to give the rest of my time to Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd, you've got about a minute.
Thank you. Mr. Nuttall, I know a lot of investors were concerned about the Venezuela, the recent stuff. How do we make Canada more competitive in light of the fact that, more Venezuelan heavy oil barrels are going to be coming onto the market, maybe not for a very long time, but certainly it doesn't appear that President Trump and the Venezuelan government will be investing in massive carbon capture projects in Venezuela. So how do we make Canada more competitive in the face of that?
It is exceptionally important that we diversify our customer base. As no business would want a customer concentration risk of 90 to 97%. That is what we have right now for, again, our largest net export. It's insanity. So an additional strategic benefit, which maybe can't be measured in dollars, but is a pipeline to the West Coast. I've given up hope on Energy East running through a particular province, but a new pipeline to the West Coast where we can access Asian thirst for our oil would go a great way to diversify our customer concentration.
Thank you both. Thank you both. And wrapping up, Mr. Gasparo for 3 precious minutes.
Great. Thank you both for attending. And Mr. Nuttall, as a recovering investment banker, I recall watching you on BNN, and you were very forthright on some of the interviews I saw you then, and it's great to see that nothing's changed. So it's great to see you. The International Energy Agency produced a report, Oil 2025 Long-Term Forecast. And in that report, it says global oil demand could grow by about 2.5 million barrels per day from 2024 to 2030, with annual growth fading over time, plateauing at about 105.5 million barrels per day, and hitting peak demand around 2030, and with the growth rate slowing after that. So what I want to get some line of sight on is, with that midterm outlook from the International Energy Agency, what type of offtake agreements do we need to see for Canadian oil and gas? Duration, price, credit quality. What do we need to see in order to have that long-term sustainability of Canadian oil getting to market?
You referenced the International Energy Association. They've typically been on the lower end of demand forecasts. Traditionally, they haven't been terrific forecasters, but there's a wide basis of opinions whether it's 2030 is peak demand, 2050, et cetera. In the end, what we have is growth in demand plus the need to offset something called production declines, and that's just of the 15,000 fields that the IEA actually studied late last year. What they found were decline rates are increasing. So that means that for Canada, our role is not just satisfying demand growth, but it's helping offset the declines in that production. I think in the not too distant future, there will be a heavy call on every single barrel that we can possibly produce. And that's why the time frame for a new million barrel per day pipeline to the West Coast, if it is in fact 8 to 10 years, we're now up against the clock. But I'm not concern about thirst for our oil. I think the minister who was in India referenced, India would buy every barrel that we would have. They want our natural gas, etc. I think there's a global thirst for incremental Canadian barrels.
So, well, I'm going off of what the IEA is saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with your previous point, but would it lead to suggesting that there are some market forces that will hinder long-term oil production? That's sort of question one or point one. Point two, does it make sense for us to continue to diversify our energy mix, to diversify into renewables, conservation, etc., with that long-term market, these long-term market forces, according to the IEA?
Yeah. So a quick response, please.
I would be worried about Canada diversifying into other areas which are virtually low to no margin industries with zero barriers of entry, because we've seen just in recent actions from Stellantis and General Motors, et cetera, there are challenges to doing that. We really need an all-of-the-above solution. So I'm the biggest proponent of championing oil and gas and also perhaps investing in other areas, because the demand for all forms of energy continues to set new highs year after year after year.
So thank you, Mr. Gasparo. Thank you to our witnesses. I think you'll agree, a very robust exchange on this panel, diverse opinions expressed, which is, of course, the nature of democracy, but we really appreciate you being with us. If there's additional information you want to forward to the committee through a brief, we welcome it. And again, we thank you for your participation this afternoon. So thanks very much. And colleagues, we are now adjourned.
Thank you.